How's it going, everyone? Now, a few months ago, I did a top 10 video of films that everyone hates that I love. Today, we're going to be flipping that around and doing 10 films that everyone loves that I dislike. And much like that video, I'm going to be challenging another fellow YouTuber to do the challenge, and they can challenge someone else in the YouTube community as well. Now, just a disclaimer, there are some big titles on this list, and I don't want anyone to get offended that their favorite film is on here. Just because it's on here does not mean that I'm attacking you and saying these films are horrible. For me personally, it just didn't satisfy my taste, and these are films that I don't like to come back and rewatch. Just no matter how many times I watch them, I cannot convince myself that I love them. Some of them are better than others, but I think with the exception of one film, I think they're all, for the most part, okay films. So if you love them, continue to do so. This is just personally my opinion of 10 films that I don't love, that the majority of the audience seems to love. With that being said, let's dive into number 10. Thor Ragnarok. I don't think this is a bad film. I think it has its fair share of entertainment. But as far as other MCU films goes, this is one of the weaker ones. In terms of story, I think it's easily one of the more disposable films in the current MCU. Nothing really adds to the buildup of Infinity War, and this kind of just felt like a way to rebrand the Thor image and make him more comical, and I'm fine with that, but I feel like the first act of this film tried to focus too much on humor and copy a lot of things that went right for Guardians of the Galaxy, and it kind of fell flat on its face for me. Yes, once we get to the Gladiator arena, things start picking up, but for me this was just a movie that introduced a lot of characters that were unnecessary, and I can't believe that they wasted the villain of Hela in this film. She could have easily been an ongoing villain after Thanos. She was definitely pretty strong to be just killed off in one film. I was left disappointed. I mean, it's probably one of the more solid Thor films, but it's one of the more inconsequential films of the entire series, and I think it gets a little more hype than it deserves. Number 9. Close Encounters of a Third Kind. Yeah, Spielberg was definitely channeling his inner Kubrick with this film, and the build-up, man, the build-up is just so slow, and it just isn't worth it. It's an interesting take on how people would react if we made first contact with extraterrestrials. The cover-ups, the world panic, a lot of questions in there, like what's going on. It does it well. And it also has a very memorable 5-tone melody from John Williams. And the effects is another thing that really holds up well. For me, the story was just a little too simple. It was dragged out a little longer than it needed to be. The ending I found rather silly and just completely non-believable. The whole tone of the film, once you believe, make you think that this is something that's actually happening. It's very believable. And then we get this kind of corny ending towards the end with those aliens that I was not digging at all. It's not one of those films that I really want to go back and revisit too often. The pacing is easily one of the worst things about it, and the story is just not one that stuck with me. Number 8, The Exorcist, the original. Labeled as one of the most scariest films of all time, honestly, nothing scared me. Now, maybe this was ahead of its time when it first came out and people were really impressed, but I've seen way too many of these exorcism films to be impressed. I mean, every film does the same thing. Some child is having a problem, it's on its ceiling, spinning its head, they gotta bring in a priest to do some kind of ritual. It's the same thing over and over again. It started off pretty good, and then just became really basic and very predictable. I'm not a fan of exorcism films, honestly. The furthest thing from being scary. I'm surprised that I enjoy The Conjuring 2 as much as I do. It's just one of those films that doesn't hold up to horror films today. It's been done to death so many times, it's no longer fresh, and I just don't enjoy it as much. At number 7 is the 1968 film Bullitt, starring Steve McQueen. No matter how many lists you look at, this is one of the ones that appear at the very top. And I haven't seen a whole lot of Steve McQueen films, but if I had to name one that I would put up top, it would be The Great Escape. This film, sure, it's influential, but I'm not going to let that sideline me into thinking that it's a great movie or something. The big car chase is entertaining enough, and I'd say the last 20 minutes is pretty good. As far as everything else goes, it's an amateurish action film with clumsy editing, a bare bones story. The whole purpose of the film is just to show off the stunt work. There's nothing else here that's worth praising. I mean, honestly, the characters have no depth. The story is wrapped up way too quickly to find believable. Our main character, played by Steve McQueen, faces no consequences for all of his actions, and the ending feels almost like a daytime soap opera. What is with that ending? Like, is there some kind of sequel that we're gonna get? It just very abrupt ending that just made me think what the whole point of this film was. Like I said, the main point of this film is to show off the stunt work, and I guess it's fine, but it's just not one of those films that has aged particularly well. And number 6 is yet another Steven Spielberg film, and that is Hook. Of all the films on this list, I think this one is actually a bad film. It's quite embarrassing. This is definitely very uncharacteristic of Spielberg. Of all the Peter Pan things you can watch, why not just watch the animated film? It's superior than this film. There's just nothing funny about this film. Everyone is overacting. Yes, they're all having fun, but this just ends up feeling like a lengthy blooper reel that just was released as a film. I saw this film a couple of years ago, and maybe I had higher expectations because there's a lot of praise for it, but for me, this was, there was nothing enjoyable about it. I didn't grow up with this film, so there's no nostalgia towards this one. I think it's easily one of Steven Spielberg's worst films. A lot of people defend it, and I'm assuming those are the people that actually grew up with this in their childhood. And for me, it didn't do it. I thought the story was rather weak. The characters are just forgettable, and critics seem to be on the fence with this one, but a lot of people do like this one. At number 5 is Gattaca. I was thinking whether to put this one on this list or not because it is kind of an overlooked film, but for the people that have seen it, they seem to really love it. And for me, I can appreciate the ideas in this film, but I think it focuses more so on its message than anything else. And when I watch fantasy films or sci-fi films, I look for well-established characters and most of all, world building. What we have in this film is a bare bones look at what this world looks like. I feel like if we go any further than what this film wants to show us, I'm going to end up walking out onto a white piece of canvas because the director clearly was not thinking about making this world seem believable and lived in, and that kind of just hurts the overall enjoyment of the film for me because that's what I look forward to in sci-fi and fantasy films. It doesn't help the fact that our characters have been all lobotomized or if walked out of a Equilibrium casting. The other issue with this film is its message. It's pushing a man of poor health into space and telling its audience that it's discrimination. I find that really unbelievable and very irresponsible. Yes, he was born in a different matter. Don't want to spoil the film for those who haven't seen it, but he wasn't born like everyone else, and there is some discrimination about people going into space that were born a certain way. And yes, that is a problem. But as far as the character that they're portraying goes, the guy clearly has some health issues. Shouldn't be going into space. You can argue all you want and say that, yeah, discrimination shouldn't happen and he deserves to get equal opportunity as everyone else. But if he's got a serious health condition, it doesn't freaking matter. It doesn't matter. It'd be very irresponsible for people like NASA to send anyone who has a heart problem or whatever the condition may be into space, and call that discrimination. That just infuriated me. For me, it just didn't make any sense for me with that character. I didn't think anything was done wrong. I didn't like the characters and the world building. Easily one of the weakest things of the film. At number 4 is John Wick Chapter 3. Now, if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, this one is the highest rated of all three of them. Now, I've never been a fan of this series to begin with. I thought the first one was fine. With each film, the plot has been getting thinner and the action has been getting more and more over the top. There's nothing new that this film brings to the table. It's more or less the same thing. And one of the things that I really hate about it is the fact that John Wick, with each film, is slowly becoming more and more invincible. And if there's anything I hate in movies, it's that. And horror films generally do that. I thought this film introduced a lot of unnecessary characters. It threw in some kind of horror folklore that kind of just didn't fit with everything else I've seen in John Wick so far. They're just trying to fill space with unnecessary subplots that don't enhance the story in any way. Yeah, the action scenes are shot well. It's fun to watch, I guess. For me personally, I've grown tired of watching these. It's one of those series that has outstayed its welcome, and I didn't love it to begin with, and my mind isn't going to be changed now. At number 3 is The Irishman. Man, the comment section is going to explode with this one. Yeah, it's hard to find a single person who disliked this film. I might be one of few. I think easily the worst thing about this film is the pacing. It is pretty horrendous. I have seen 3.5 hour, 4-hour films that have been paced a million times better than this film. And I know people were like, oh yeah, well you gotta watch it in 2 watches, take a break. No. Films aren't supposed to be broken into 2 parts. Then this should have been made into a TV series. My other issue with this one is the characters. I did not care for a single character. I thought the story was painfully uninteresting. And not a single one of these characters I found intimidating. Yeah, this is supposed to be like a swan song to the mob genre or something, but all honesty, I think they like to see this crazy pairing of stars from their favorite mob films all in one film, and they start fanboying over it, but I really didn't understand why people love this film. I think the effects were pretty bad. I did not buy for a single second that De Niro was young, and he's barely moving around in this film. There's nothing new here that hasn't been done in the mob genre before, let alone from Scorsese. He just keeps doing the same repetitive thing over and over again, throwing elements of nostalgia in there. I've never been a fan of the genre. I can respect some of the older films. I think that Goodfellas was a way better film, and Scorsese has a bunch of other films that are better than this. There's a reason why this one didn't win any awards. I didn't think it deserved any. People, I think, are afraid to hate on Scorsese's films. I don't see myself watching this again. I had a tough time watching this to begin with. I don't know. This is not the genre for me. Maybe I'm not seeing something, but for me personally, this is not a film that I enjoyed watching. I couldn't wait till it was over. And it's certainly, with that runtime, I would not want to ever see this film again. No attack on anyone who loved it, but it just wasn't for me. At number 2 is Forrest Gump. Yeah, it's on here. It's beloved. It's got a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. For all the films on this list, this is the highest rated film on Rotten Tomatoes. And in my opinion, it's one of the most overrated films of all time. There's nothing charming about it. The humor didn't work for me. Wasn't sure half the time if I was supposed to be laughing or finding scenes serious. I also think that maybe this is just me and I'm reading into things, but the film smothers its viewer with its mockery of disability. Oh, well, this guy can do this, that, and this. He's met the president 3 times. He brought Watergate to light. He served in the war. This guy ran for days on end and inspired everyone else to start working out. All that was left is to send this guy to outer space. I think they were hitting us over the head with people with a disability can do anything. This comical approach just made me think that this was kind of disrespectful, if anything, to people who have a disability, because clearly people who have a disability do have some limitations. And this film is trying to say there are no limitations, and with this over-the-top comedic approach, I found kind of offensive. I thought the narration was annoying, the effects don't hold up. Sure, it's a quotable movie, but its story is never something I would ever want to watch again. It's just not a story that sticks with me. I really dislike the characters. I think Tom Hanks is a weak character who just submits to anything, and the Jenny woman, horrible person. Like, why would he even want to be with her anyway? Some films have such a good story that they bring you back and you want to watch this film countless times again. This one, I've seen twice. Twice was enough. I didn't like it then, and on rewatch, I still don't like it, and if anything, I liked it even less the second time around. This one didn't do it for me either. Before I unveil my number one pick, I do want to mention a couple of honorable mentions that didn't make the list. We'll start with the first one, and that's El Camino. Really didn't like this film that much. I really was disappointed by this film. I think Breaking Bad is one of the best shows ever. Better Call Saul is very good. I think not a lot of people are talking about that series. But as far as this film goes, I think this was a highly disposable film that didn't bring anything to the table, and could have easily just been a one additional episode of Breaking Bad. The Rocky Horror Picture Show is next. Didn't love this film either. I think it has some entertainment value. They show this film way too much on college campuses during Halloween. It's got a cult following, but it also has a pretty high score on Rotten Tomatoes. It's entertaining to watch, but I don't love it. The Departed. I think it's a good movie, but a lot of people, when you mention Scorsese's name, this is one of the first films that comes up. Honestly, I don't think this is a film that should have won Best Picture. There's so many other of his films that didn't win. I think they were just handing this one to him. By all means, it's not a bad movie. I think it's actually good. I don't think it's as great as everyone else says, though. The Shining and Doctor Sleep. I'll throw them in here as well because Doctor Sleep I didn't like at all. I liked the villain, but everything else I really didn't care for. As for The Shining, I think it's a good movie, but it could have just been a movie following the husband who's gradually going more and more insane by the minute, instead of the kid having this supernatural powers. I think is unnecessary for the film. I don't like that Kubrick kind of gave away a lot within the first 10 minutes of the film. It's a good film. It's growing on me with more and more watches, but it's by all means not a perfect film, as people say it is. Next up, Nightmare Before Christmas. Another cult film. People really seem to love this one, but in my opinion, Corpse Bride is a better Tim Burton film. And lastly, The Grand Budapest Hotel. I can respect the craft of Wes Anderson. For me personally, I've enjoyed some of his films. This one didn't do it for me. I didn't think the comedy worked, and I didn't think the storytelling was that great either. But, you know, this is just me. A lot of people who adore Wes Anderson think this is one of his best films. Just wasn't for me. And my number one pick, and that's Halloween, the original. It is so hard to find anybody who has anything negative to say about this film. I'm not a fan of horror films, but the ones I do like, they all, for the most part, have substance. This one has nothing there. I didn't find it scary. What annoyed the crap out of me was just, why the hell is Michael Myers going around killing people? What is the motivation? We don't get any answers. People constantly rewatch this film every single Halloween. This film has spawned so many remakes and reboots. It's honestly just tiring. There's another person on YouTube by the name of Cinemassacre who made a very similar list, and Matrix was on his list. And he said he doesn't hate the film, but he hates everything that came after the film because so many people would start copying the style. It started appearing in a lot of other films. Not because he didn't like Matrix, just didn't like what it did for the genre. And that's what I feel like with Halloween. I hate what it did with the genre. This slasher genre just took off. They kept making countless Friday the 13th movies, Freddy Krueger movies, countless Halloween movies. And I think I'm just tired of these Halloween films. They just need to stop. And it all started with this one. I don't get what the hype is around this one either. Much like what I said about John Wick Chapter 3 is what has happened with Michael Myers. As the series has progressed, he has become more and more of a zombie that can't be killed. I mean, seriously, at one point in this series, the guy's head gets chopped off. Somehow in the next film he comes back and we're saying that, oh, someone else in his costume. Come on. With this film being number one, it's more of a frustration with the series as a whole, yet maybe not so much with the first film, but I'm putting it as my number one. I honestly, the second film is actually better than this one. at least we get some some answers finally. And I do think the score was a little bit more chilling in the second film. But of all the Halloween films, Halloween 3 is probably the most original film, and that's the one without Michael Myers. And it's the film that's maybe hated the most, but it's probably the film I like the most of the entire series. The only slasher films I like, in fact, are Alfred Hitchcock slashers, Dial M for Murder, and Psycho. I think those are two very good ones. And as far as these generic horror slasher films, they do nothing for me. I don't find them entertaining. I don't think they're good movies. They're at best B-rate films that people just like to watch over and over again on Halloween. I'm not one of those people. But people love it. They have the right to do so. For me, I've seen this film 3 times, try to convince myself that it's a good movie, and I'm just not seeing it. So that wraps up my list of 10 films that everyone loves that I dislike. Hopefully I didn't aggravate anybody, and these were all my opinions. Honestly, if you love these films, continue to do so. For me, these just don't do it no matter how many times I watch them. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I'm going to be challenging a fellow YouTuber, and that will be Chad Saborn. I did the last video with him. Be sure to check out his channel. He's got some really great content. He does ranking videos. He's pretty up to date with a lot of movie reviews. So be sure to check the channel out. I'll be leaving that down below in the description. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any comments, please comment them down below. Let's stay civil though. And I'd be curious to hear 10 films that you personally dislike that everyone else seems to love. So be sure to comment them down below. Hit the subscribe button for more, and I'll see you guys next time for more unboxings, reviews, and movie news.